I'm happy to welcome you to the first talk, the first presentation in the series on the book of Revelation under the heading Revelation as a Vision of Healing. And I am sorry that we have to start with a twist on that term. We have to retrieve Revelation's vision of healing. It isn't like it is self-evident to many readers what I am hoping that we will see in this book. When we go to the end of the book of Revelation, to chapter 21 and 22, we see some texts, and I'd like to read one of those texts in Revelation 21, 3 and 4. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, the dwelling place of God is among human beings. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And God will wipe every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more, nor grief, nor wailing, nor pain will be any more, for the former state of things has passed away." Now, if I were to say that this text gives us a vision of healing, you would not be able to disagree with me. That would be a given. There is comprehensive healing in this text. Every tear, no more death, no wailing, no pain. There is not much left to do then when all of these things are promised. So, and my illustrations, the pictures here are meant to say that the tears will be no more and death will be no more, and the sad person will not be anymore either. Let's look at one more text. This one is from chapter 22. It's one of my favorite texts in this book, Revelation 22:17. "And the Spirit and the bride say, 'Come.' And let the one who hears say, 'Come.' And the thirsty, let him or her come. And the one who would like to have it, let him or her take the water of life as a gift." So here we have the promise of healing too. And this is a promise given to those who feel thirsty. And that is a very generic way of talking about human need. So, here we have then, at the ending of Revelation, we have verses, we have texts that seem to deliver on the billing that we have given this book, that Revelation gives us a vision of healing. And let's just run through it one more time with a little bit of an expansion on the text we read already from Revelation 21. Here, the sea was no more, death will be no more, grief will be no more, wailing will be no more, pain will be no more, all things accursed will be no more, and night will be no more. And you will notice that the first one here, the sea, that is a symbol of evil. So evil will be no more, and night is also in some ways an expression of darkness. And so evil will be no more, darkness will be no more. That's the type of vision we get here. So what's the problem? Well, there is a problem, because Revelation's reputation is not that it is a vision of healing. If we ask the novelist, the literary critic, the psychologist, or the philosopher, if we ask the Protestant reformers, or we ask biblical scholars, with a very few exceptions, if we ask popular culture, especially popular religious culture, and especially popular religious culture in America, we might find a very different impression. So here is D.H. Lawrence, who is famous for his books and his novels, and I will not go into his novels, but he has written a book. He wrote a book on the Apocalypse, and he calls it a repulsive work, disgusting, beastly, hideous. And then he says, quite, in some ways amusingly, just as inevitably as Jesus had to have a Judas Iscariot among his disciples, so that there have to be a revelation in the New Testament. So among the books of the New Testament, the book of Revelation is Judas. He is the one who betrays Jesus in print, you might say. That's D.H. Lawrence. We look at America's most famous literary critic, I think that is fair to say, Harold Bloom, who's written on all kinds of things, all kinds of literature, including the book of Revelation. Resentment and not love is the teaching of the Revelation of St. John the Divine. It is a book without wisdom, goodness, kindness, or affection of any kind. Perhaps it is appropriate that the celebration of the end of the world should be not only barbaric, but scarcely literate. So bad message and bad writing. He was a bad writer. Now let's look at the psychologist. Some of you are, I think, I will have some people in my audience who are going to be psychologists, and here is your psychologist. This is Carl G. Jung, who was a friend or colleague, or at least at some point an ally of Sigmund Freud, and had a huge influence on his own. He says that the writer of the book of Revelation had a troubled mind, he had a troubled psyche. He was not a good person, he was not a stable person. He says that you find in this book a veritable orgy of hatred, wrath, vindictiveness, and blind destructive fury that revels in fantastic images of terror, breaks out and with blood and fire overwhelms a world which Christ had just endeavored to restore to the original state of innocence and loving communion with God. That's similar to the statement we read already about Revelation being a Judas in the New Testament. Here too, Jesus had fixed everything, and then the book of Revelation comes and ruins it. That's basically what he is saying. And the mind of the person who wrote this book was not in a good state. And now we go to the philosopher. We go to Nietzsche, who actually thought quite well of Jesus in the Gospels. He did not think well of Paul. He disliked the Apostle Paul tremendously. And here you can see that he dislikes the book of Revelation. What, conversely, did the Jews feel against Rome? One can surmise it from 1,000 symptoms, but it is sufficient to carry one's mind back to the Johannian Apocalypse, that most obscene of all the written outbursts, which has revenge on its conscience. One should also appraise at its full value the profound logic of the Christian instinct. This is what Christianity is about. He says basically it's a religion that preaches revenge. When over this book of hate, he calls it, it wrote the name of the disciple of love, that self-same disciple to whom it attributed that impassioned and ecstatic gospel. Therein lurks a portion of truth, however much literary forging may have been necessary for this purpose. Well, he really hands it to you, doesn't he? So the book of Revelation is a book that preaches a theology of revenge. And God is a vengeful God in this book. But the author of Revelation, he does it according to what was the standard understanding, that the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation have the same author. But he thinks that is impossible because the writer or the author of the Gospel of John is a disciple of love. But this man, he is a preacher of hatred. So there must have been a forgery, that this book sneaked into the New Testament as a forgery, claiming to be the work of John the Evangelist. It cannot be any such thing. So Well, let's go to some people that we might have higher expectations of. We might just think we'll get a little bit of a respite. We go to the leading Protestant reformer. We look at what Martin Luther will say about the book. This is the early Luther. He did say something a little more accepting later in life. But here we go. I miss more than one thing in this book, and it makes me consider it to be neither apostolic nor prophetic. For me, this is reason enough not to think highly of it. Christ is neither taught nor known in it. So here is a book in the New Testament, and you know what happened to Jesus. So Luther applies a norm to the New Testament. It should be like this, and Revelation falls outside that norm as a book that it doesn't measure up. And here are two other reformers, Zwingli, the Swiss reformer, and Calvin, who was French but worked in French Switzerland. Zwingli, he says, well, it's not a biblical book. With the Apocalypse we have no concern, for it is not a biblical book. Even though all they seek in it serves us and not them. That is to say, well, you know, if we were to accept it, it would be to our advantage, but it's not a biblical book. And Calvin, what did he say? He didn't say anything. He simply just ignored it, almost like he pretended it isn't there. Well, let's do a little fast forward to more recent times, and John Collins. He is a professor at Yale University. I have a daughter who is teaching at Yale, and she sees John Collins quite frequently in faculty meetings. But John Collins is a leading authority on what is called apocalyptic literature. And Revelation is by many scholars thought to belong to that genre of literature, apocalyptic literature. So what does John Collins say about the book? I have met him too, I like him, he's a very nice person, and he's just an amazing scholar. What we find in Revelation is the projection into the future of what was unfulfilled in the past. Jesus did not destroy the wicked in this earthly life, but he would return with supernatural power to complete the task. So the Jesus we know from the Gospels is not the whole story. There is another side to Jesus, and that side will be revealed to us in the book of Revelation, as John Collins understands apocalyptic literature. And this person, C.H. Dodd, he is one of the leading scholars in Britain in the 20th century, and he is also one of the translators of the New English Bible. So this is not a nobody, this is a very, very upstanding scholar. He says about Revelation, we are bound to judge that its conception of the character of God and his attitude to man, the book falls below the level, not only of the teachings of Jesus, but also of the best parts of the Old Testament. So here, this book is not really, worthy of Jesus, even though it is called the Revelation of Jesus Christ. And it is even, you're better served by going to some books in the Old Testament than to go to the book of Revelation. Well, I'm really piling it up, am I not? Well, I have one more example of how this book is perceived. Now, some of you may have been exposed to the Left Behind series. That was, it's a 12-volume thing, a very major work. It is one of the most successful, I think it has been called the most successful book in religious printing. Here, this by the time this picture was taken, it had sold 55 million copies. It has sold, I think the latest figure I heard was 62 million copies. So these books have been widely disseminated in the US, mostly in the US, because this is a religious and it is in some ways a distinctively American take on the book of Revelation. And what it finds is a violent God and a violent Jesus, and it finds it that way affirmingly. It doesn't stumble over this and says we wish it weren't so. We think it is so, and we think it's fine. So here is from the last of the 12 volumes by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins, describing what happens when Jesus returns. Tens of thousands fell dead, simply dropping where they stood, their bodies ripped open, blood pooling in great masses. Tens of thousands grabbed their heads or their chests, fell to their knees, and writhed as they were invisibly sliced asunder. Their innards and entrails gushed to the desert floor, their blood pooling and rising in the unforgiving brightness of the glory of Christ. And one more, and this sounds, I thought, well, this is a description of ISIS, but here it is a description of Jesus Christ as they understand it. Their flesh dissolved, their eyes melted, and their tongues disintegrated. So, let's do it again. If we ask the novelist, the literary critic, the psychologist, or the philosopher, or the Protestant reformers, or biblical scholars with a few exceptions, or popular culture, especially popular religious culture, and especially the popular religious culture of America, then they will answer that Revelation is not a vision of healing. So this, of course, creates a challenge for us, because we cannot just walk into and say, well, Revelation is a vision of healing. We have a crowd of people who read it otherwise and who see this book as something quite different. So I'd like to show some contrasts then to help us establish some categories, some concepts. So, should we read Revelation mostly as a text that has a medical vision? That is to say, a vision of healing. Or should we read it more as a text that has a legal message? And in the legal framework, you will have judgment, you will have punishment. So, should it be medical? Should it be legal? Should it be a message that illuminates and helps open up our understanding, a message of revelation? Or is it mostly a message of retribution? I will use that contrast more than once in this course, the contrast between retribution and revelation. The book helps us see things as they are, or the book presents a message of retribution. And here again, the contrast between healing and anguish, and you will see that I have drawn thick lines on some of these, on the legal, because that is the dominant view, on the retribution, because that is the dominant view, and on the anguish that goes with this territory, because that is also the dominant view. And out here there is healing sort of hanging by a thread, as it were, in our understanding of this book. So there is an entrenched perception of this book that I will try to illustrate here with some help from people who know how to make these types of illustrations, that Revelation brings to us a vision of divine retribution. And that kind of outshines, that kind of overwhelms or overshadows whatever vision of healing this book may have. So I wish to contend then for the healing part, and I am confident that it can be done successfully. I am confident that that is the correct reading and that the other readings are misreadings. And Revelation will itself help us understand why the book is so easily misread. So this is a sort of self-correcting enterprise when we get to it. So I'd like to extinguish this side of it. I'd like it to be extinguished completely, as it were, and to let that healing vision be the one that sort of fills the frame, as it were. So I came to this book. I have had its melody, you might say, in my head since childhood, because I grew up in a home where the Bible was read quite a lot, and I remember that the last couple of chapters in Revelation had some appeal to me, even though I wasn't particularly religious. I was, all over the place. But I picked up some of that tune, some of that healing tune. And then, of course, as an adult, much later in life, I came to the University of St Andrews in Scotland to do a PhD in New Testament studies, and to make Revelation my subject, and to write a doctoral dissertation on the book of Revelation. And I was sleepless in St. Andrews when I started for two reasons. I'll just tell you one of those reasons. And the other one I may tell you later. But one of the reasons is that Revelation is read as a vision of retribution. That the retribution emphasis is so entrenched. And how do you turn it? How do you make that change? And how do you, and here, this is my home village in Tonstad in Norway. This is the Tyrifjord school where I went to high school. This is where I went to college, at least a little while, in Beirut, Lebanon. And this is the campus of Andrews University in Michigan. I was a student there for a year. Then I studied medicine at Loma Linda University, and finally I came to the University of St. Andrews. I've been all over the place, traveling and studying and thinking, and wanting to make the point that the book of constantly sort of preoccupied with this vision, not to let anything sort of overshadow it, undo it, ruin it. This promise that he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, that death will be no more, mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. That's where sort of the journey, and I am very grateful for the opportunity to share with you the fruit of my journey on all of these things and all of those years. One of my mentors at the University of St. Andrews is Richard Bauckham. He was not my main mentor, that was just fine, but I consider him a friend, and I had read much of his work before I came to St. Andrews. I wanted to go there because I really, really liked some of the things he has said about the book. And his book, The Climax of Prophecy, is a very influential book on Revelation. Well, I just want to keep in mind all the negative assessments, negative verdicts we had read already, and now listen to Richard Bauckham. The Apocalypse of John is a work of immense learning, astonishingly meticulous literary artistry. Remember that Harold Bloom says that John is scarcely literate, but Richard Bauckham thinks he's very literate. Astonishingly meticulous literary artistry, how is that? Remarkable creative imagination, radical political critique, and profound theology. That's a different way, and of course I am aligning myself with that view without a doubt. So in my attempt to retrieve Revelation's vision of healing, I have written some articles, and I have written two books. One was my doctoral dissertation, and you can tell from my title that there is a goal in it, saving God's reputation. That's not something I think I can do, but it is something Revelation can do, and I think that is what Revelation is up to. And then my commentary published in 2019, the Paideia commentary on the New Testament, which is published in a major New Testament series. I'm very grateful for the confidence shown in me to write this commentary. And yes, I have brought to the market an interpretation of Revelation that sees the book as a vision of healing. So, as we close our first subject, we come to this book, and there is a fork in the road, and one side leads to a vision of retribution, and the other side leads to a vision of revelation, and ultimately a vision of healing. And the road most people take is actually that road of retribution. And I will just say that there is a fork in the road, and which one will we take? And then when we get to the ending of our course, we will return to the last two chapters in the book of Revelation and concentrate on those, because that's where we find this emphasis just sort of driven home to us, like the crescendo or the climax of a symphony. No more tears, a healed earth, a healed city, a healed world, the nations will find healing, but all centered on the healing of the name. Because yes, there are many things in life that are in need of healing, but there is nothing that is more in need of healing than our conceptions of the kind of person God is, the healing of the name. And Revelation is in the business of helping us see that. So this ends my first topic, and we will have a chance to converse, I hope, in class. Thank you.